"Mom, stop embarrassing us. You are not coming to that graduation. Do you understand me?" Those were the words my daughter Vanessa said to me 3 days before my granddaughter Emily's college graduation, the same graduation I had been counting down to for 4 years. Let me tell you this the way it happened, because when a woman my age is dismissed, people are quick to rewrite her story. I am 67 years old. I am not confused. I am not fragile. And I know exactly what was taken from me. For months, I had been preparing for that day. I had already laid my dress out on the guest room bed, a navy blue dress with soft sleeves, pressed and ready. I had even taken it to the cleaners, though there was nothing wrong with it. I polished my low heels. I made a hair appointment. I told the ladies in my church Bible study that my granddaughter was graduating from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I said it the way a woman says something sacred, because it was sacred to me. My late husband Charles used to say that education is something no one can repossess. He was a firefighter for 28 years before lung disease took him. We didn't leave behind millions. What we left behind was discipline, savings, and a promise that the next generation would stand higher than we did. So when Emily got into UNC, I stepped in quietly. Over 4 years, I paid $96,000 in tuition, housing, and fees. I have every receipt, every confirmation email, every wire transfer record. I sent the final payment, $7,240, on the morning Vanessa came to my house. I printed the receipt and placed it carefully on the kitchen counter. I also bought white lilies, $85 for the bouquet. Emily once told me lilies looked elegant, and I wanted her to feel elegant when she saw me holding them in the stands. I was excited, truly excited, the kind of excitement that keeps you awake at night smiling at the ceiling. When Vanessa arrived that afternoon, she didn't smile back. She walked into my kitchen wearing a tailored cream blazer and narrow heels, her hair styled smooth and sharp. Mark, her husband, followed behind her with that tight-lipped expression he wears when money is involved. I was telling her how proud I was, how I'd already mapped the drive to Chapel Hill to avoid traffic, how I planned to sit near the aisle so Emily could see me wave. Vanessa didn't let me finish. "Mom, stop embarrassing us. You are not coming to that graduation. Do you understand me?" I froze, not because I didn't hear her, because I couldn't believe what I had heard. "I beg your pardon?" I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "This is going to be a very upscale event," she continued, her tone crisp, managerial. "Mark's investors are attending the celebration dinner afterward. Emily's friends come from prominent families. We need everything to look polished." Polished. She glanced at my kitchen, at my simple curtains, at the ceramic cookie jar that had sat on this counter since she was a little girl. Then she looked at me. "Mom, you don't exactly fit the image we're presenting." The words didn't land all at once. They settled slowly, like dust after something shatters. "You think I'm not, what? Classy enough?" I asked. Vanessa sighed, exasperated. "Please don't make this dramatic. You say things sometimes. You repeat stories. You talk about the past. It's not the vibe we're going for." "The vibe," Mark finally spoke. "It's just important this week, Mrs. Miller." "Mrs. Miller." Not Mom. Not Gloria. "Mrs. Miller." My chest tightened, but I stayed upright. I have sat through school board confrontations more hostile than this. I know how to remain composed when people underestimate me. "I paid for that education," I said carefully. "Every semester." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "And we appreciate that. But writing checks doesn't mean you get to control everything." Control. I wasn't asking to control anything. I wanted to sit in the stands and clap. At that moment, Emily walked in. My granddaughter, 22 years old, smart, ambitious, the first in our family to graduate college without student debt. "Grandma, what's going on?" she asked. Vanessa answered before I could. "I was explaining that Grandma isn't coming to the ceremony." Emily hesitated. For a split second, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. I reached for the gift box on the counter, a small navy velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet engraved with the word foundation. I had chosen that word because I wanted her to remember what she was built on. "I got you something for graduation," I said softly. Emily looked at her mother. Vanessa's expression hardened. "Grandma, this really isn't the time," Emily said, her voice tight. I stepped closer, holding the box out anyway. "Just open it later." Emily took the box, but instead of holding it, she pushed it back toward me, and it slipped from my hands. It hit the tile floor with a small, sharp sound. The lid popped open. The bracelet slid out and skidded across the kitchen. "I don't want to deal with this right now," she said quickly. "Mom's right. It's going to be a big event. There's a certain atmosphere." Atmosphere. I stared at the bracelet lying near the base of the refrigerator. 4 years of tuition. Countless quiet sacrifices. And in that moment, I was excess. If you feel this moment, please like this video and comment where you're watching. From someone near you might be watching and feeling this story too. Vanessa stepped forward. "Mom, please don't make a scene. We've already told people you won't be attending because you haven't been feeling well." There it was again. The narrative forming. I bent down slowly and picked up the bracelet. My hands did not shake. But something inside me shifted. They left soon after. No apology. No reconsideration. Just the closing of my front door. The house fell quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock Charles repaired before he died. I sat at my kitchen table. The lilies were still fresh, their white petals just beginning to open. The tuition receipt lay beside my laptop. I opened the computer and logged into the education trust account. The balance was wrong. At first, I thought perhaps it was a timing issue. Pending transactions sometimes take a day or two to clear. I refreshed the screen. The number didn't change. Then I saw it. 14,000,000. Wire transfer. Recipient. Miller Growth Ventures, LLC. Description. Family investment. The transfer had been processed 3 days earlier. I had not authorized it. I clicked into the documentation. A digital signature appeared at the bottom of the authorization form. My name, my initials, a scanned version of my signature. But I know my signature. I have signed documents for 32 years as an accountant. The slant of my G, the way I press slightly harder on the second L in Miller. That was not mine. I leaned back slowly. Miller Growth Ventures was Mark's company. Outside my window, the maple tree Charles planted swayed in the afternoon breeze. He used to say that storms don't uproot trees with deep foundations. I looked down at the bracelet resting in my palm. Foundation. They thought I was an embarrassment. They thought I was fading. But I still remember every number. And something told me this was only the beginning. I did not sleep much that night. Not because of the money, because of the look on Emily's face when that bracelet hit the tile. It wasn't cruelty. Not exactly. It was something worse. It was alignment. She had chosen her mother's side without even realizing she was choosing. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30, the same time I had woken up for 32 years when I worked for the Mecklenburg County School District. Habit does not retire just because you do. I made coffee. Black. 2 slices of wheat toast. I sat at the same kitchen table where Vanessa had once done her algebra homework while I checked district ledgers. I have always believed numbers tell the truth, even when people do not. Before looking at the trust account again, I opened Facebook. I don't post often. Women my age observe more than we perform, but I wanted to see what narrative had already been constructed. There it was. Photos from the pre-graduation dinner the night before. Vanessa in a champagne-colored dress. Mark in a tailored navy suit. Emily glowing between them. A long table at a rooftop restaurant in uptown Charlotte. String lights overhead. Wine glasses catching the city skyline. Caption, "Celebrating our girl. We couldn't be prouder. It takes a village." The comments were full of praise. "You two raised her right. Such a beautiful family. Hard work pays off." I searched the photos carefully. No tag of me. No mention of Grandma. I zoomed into one image where Emily was holding a glass of sparkling water. The bracelet I had given her was not on her wrist. Of course it wasn't. It was still on my kitchen counter. I closed Facebook and returned to the trust account screen. The $140,000 transfer was not a glitch. The documentation showed it had been initiated from an IP address registered to Vanessa's home. The authorization form listed my name as signatory. I printed everything. Old habits. When you suspect irregularities, you document before you confront. I opened my file cabinet in the hallway, the same oak cabinet Charles had assembled himself 25 years ago. Inside were labeled folders, insurance, property tax, investments, trust accounts, Power of attorney. I pulled out the POA file. 2 years ago, before my knee replacement surgery, I had granted Vanessa temporary financial authority, limited scope, 90 days. That document clearly stated expiration terms. But beneath it, I found a second form. A revised document dated 6 months after my surgery. Broader language, extended authority. My signature was at the bottom. I stared at it. The pen pressure was mine. The signature shape was mine. But the date, I did not remember signing an extension. I sat down slowly on the hallway bench. Had she slipped it in among hospital paperwork? Had I signed in pain, distracted, trusting? Trust is a dangerous currency. My phone buzzed. Vanessa. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then it stopped. A text followed. Mom, please don't overreact about yesterday. This is just about Image. We love you. Image. The word felt heavier than insult. I typed back nothing. Instead, I returned to the account summary and traced the transfer routing number. Miller Growth Ventures, LLC. Registered to Mark Miller. Filed 18 months ago. Primary business address, their suburban office park near South Park. I knew about the company, of course. Mark had pitched it at Thanksgiving 1 year as a private growth fund. He spoke in confident phrases, leveraged equity, strategic positioning, capital infusion. What he did not mention was that family capital apparently counted. At 10 a.m., I called the trust's servicing bank. I did not accuse. I inquired. I'm reviewing a large transfer made on May 12th, I said evenly. I'd like confirmation of the authorization process. The representative placed me on hold. Soft instrumental jazz played in my ear, the kind designed to soothe people who are about to discover something unpleasant. When she returned, her tone had shifted slightly. Yes, Mrs. Miller, the transfer was approved via digital signature and secondary email verification. Which email? I asked. She read it. It was not my email. It was an address I did not recognize. I wrote it down carefully. Thank you, I said. When I hung up, the kitchen felt smaller. They had created a secondary verification path. They had anticipated scrutiny. This was not an impulsive act. This was structured. My chest tightened not from panic, but from clarity. At noon, I drove to Chapel Hill alone, not to attend the ceremony. I kept my word once it was made clear I was not welcome. But I parked a mile from campus and sat in my car while the ceremony livestream played on my phone. Rows of graduates in Carolina blue, families cheering, cameras flashing. When Emily's name was called, I clapped inside my car. No one heard me, but I clapped anyway. Vanessa and Mark appeared briefly on the live stream, standing proudly when Emily crossed the stage. Vanessa dabbed at her eyes dramatically. Mark shook hands with someone in a gray suit. Investors. So that was the real audience. I turned off the stream and drove home before the ceremony ended. That evening, Facebook filled with photos from the official event. Emily in cap and gown. Vanessa captioning another post, so grateful for the sacrifices we made to give her this future. Sacrifices we made. I set my phone down gently. The pain came in waves, then not sharp, but deep. The kind that presses into old memories. I remembered working overtime during budget season. Missing weekend trips because district audits ran late. Choosing generic brands. Saying no to vacations. I did not regret a single sacrifice. What I regretted was raising a daughter who mistook provision for weakness. At 7:15 p.m., there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down. 73, church choir alto. Gloria, I saw the graduation pictures online, she beamed. You must be so proud. I smiled. I am, I said. She looked past me into the quiet house. You didn't go? No, I replied calmly. They wanted a smaller circle. Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted slightly. Not judgment, not pity, recognition. Well, she said gently, you know who really builds these kids up. Yes, I did. That night, after dinner, baked chicken, green beans, cornbread, I sat at my desk and opened a new folder on my computer. Title: Documentation. Inside it, I saved the bank statements, the digital authorization copy, screenshots of the transfer confirmation, the alternate email address. Then I wrote one sentence in a blank document. They are positioning me. Because that is what this was. They were building a narrative. Older mother, repeating stories, forgetting details, signing papers she doesn't understand. But here is the truth. I understand perfectly. And if they believe embarrassment was the wound that would silence me, they have underestimated what 67 years of discipline can do. The morning after the graduation, I did what I have always done when something doesn't sit right in my spirit. I organized. Not emotionally. Documentationally. I cleared my dining table, the same oak table Charles and I bought from a clearance warehouse when Vanessa was 10. I laid out every printed bank statement in chronological order. I retrieved the original trust formation documents from 2001. I opened my laptop and pulled up archived emails going back 5 years. If someone intended to build a case that I was forgetful, unstable, or confused, they had chosen the wrong woman. By Oshem. 15 a.m. My coffee had gone cold, but my thoughts had sharpened. The $140,000 transfer had been executed 3 days before Vanessa told me I was embarrassing. That timing was not accidental. 3 days before a high-profile graduation event attended by Mark's investors. 3 days before they publicly celebrated their sacrifices. Money moved quietly. Narrative built loudly. I returned to the extended power of attorney document I had found the day before. The language granted Vanessa broad authority over investment accounts, trusts, and related financial instruments. It was dated 6 months after my knee surgery. I searched my memory for that period. I remembered physical therapy. I remembered swelling. I remembered being tired. I did not remember signing an expansion of authority. I examined the signature again. It was mine. But something about the spacing felt off. The margin alignment was inconsistent with my usual preference. I am meticulous about alignment. Years of auditing teach you to notice when something is 1 millimeter out of place. I opened the scanned copy's metadata. Creation date, 8:42 p.m. The evening timestamp struck me. I rarely sign legal documents at night. I leaned back and closed my eyes. There are 2 types of betrayal. The impulsive kind and the planned kind. This was planned. At 9:30 a.m., I called Linda Carver. Linda is 58, sharp-eyed, and has represented 3 women in my church through probate disputes. She does not speak in comforting cliches. She speaks in strategy. "Gloria," she answered, her voice steady. "What's going on?" "I believe my daughter used an extended power of attorney to transfer $140,000 from my granddaughter's education trust into her husband's LLC. There was a pause. "Did you authorize it?" she asked. "No." "Did you sign the extension?" "I signed something," I admitted. "But I do not recall extending authority beyond 90 days. Another pause. "Bring me everything," Linda said, "and don't confront them yet." I smiled faintly. I wasn't planning to. After hanging up, I walked through my house slowly. The walls were lined with framed photographs. Vanessa at age 6 holding a spelling bee ribbon. Emily at 8 missing her 2 front teeth. Charles in his fire department uniform. I stopped in front of one photo in particular. Vanessa at her high school graduation. She had cried in my arms afterward, promising she would never forget everything I did. Memory is selective when success arrives. My phone buzzed again. "Vanessa." I answered this time. "Mom," she began, voice softer than before. "Why didn't you come to the celebration dinner last night?" people were asking. "I wasn't invited," I replied evenly. She exhaled. "Don't twist things." "I'm not twisting anything. I'm documenting." Silence. "What does that mean?" she asked carefully. "It means I've reviewed the trust account." There was a shift in her breathing. Small, quick. "Oh," she said lightly. "That." "Mom, we were going to explain. It was an investment opportunity. Mark's firm needed temporary capital. It's all internal. It's family." "Family?" I repeated. "Family does not fabricate email verifications." The silence lengthened. "You don't understand how these structures work," she said, a defensive edge creeping in. "You've always been conservative. This is how wealth grows." "I grew wealth," I said quietly, "by not stealing it." Her tone hardened instantly. "Don't accuse us of stealing. You signed the POA extension. I will verify that." "Mom," she snapped, "you're starting to sound paranoid." There it was. The pivot. When facts surface, call the source unstable. I've scheduled a meeting with my attorney, I said calmly. You're overreacting, she replied. Do you want to tear this family apart over paperwork? Paperwork. The word made me almost laugh. Paperwork is what built this family's stability. Vanessa, I said softly, you already tore something. She hung up first. I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. At noon, I drove to Linda's office downtown. Charlotte's skyline reflected in the glass buildings like a mirror of ambition. Mark loved bringing investors here. He loved the appearance of growth. Linda reviewed the documents in silence. She circled the email verification address. This account was created 2 weeks before the transfer, she noted. That's not accidental. She flipped to the POA extension. Even if you signed this, she said, fiduciary duty still applies. Authority does not equal personal enrichment. I nodded. What are my options? I asked. You can revoke the POA immediately. Freeze related accounts. Demand a formal accounting from the LLC. If funds were misrepresented, we escalate. Escalate. The word carried weight. And the guardianship talk? I asked. She looked up sharply. What guardianship talk? They've been implying I'm forgetful, that I repeat myself. Linda leaned back. That's positioning, she said. If they anticipate dispute, they may attempt to establish diminished capacity. There it was again. Positioning. They won't succeed, Linda added firmly. But we move quickly. On the drive home, I felt something shift inside me, not anger, clarity. When I pulled into my driveway, the lilies inside my kitchen window caught the sunlight. Their petals had fully opened now, wide, unapologetic. I walked inside, placed my purse on the counter, and picked up the engraved bracelet again. Foundation. They thought I was old. They thought I was soft. But foundations are not decorative. They are structural. And if my daughter and her husband believed they could build an empire on money taken without consent, they were about to learn what happens when the foundation pushes back. There is a particular kind of pain that does not announce itself loudly. It settles. It waits. And then, when you think you have measured the full extent of the damage, it reveals there is more. 3 days after my meeting with Linda Carver, I received a certified envelope in the mail. Return address, Carolina First Lending. I stood at my kitchen counter holding it for a full minute before opening it. My name was typed neatly across the front. Proper, formal, official. Inside was a notice of collateral review. I read the first paragraph once, then twice, then a third time, slower. The home equity line of credit associated with my primary residence was under reassessment due to investment performance risk indicators. I did not have a home equity line of credit, at least, not that I had opened. My pulse slowed instead of quickened. That is something people misunderstand about women like me. When crisis arrives, we do not flail. We focus. I walked to my file cabinet again and pulled the property folder. Deed. Property tax records. Home insurance declarations. No loan documentation. I returned to the letter. Loan origination date, 11 months ago. Borrower, Gloria D. Miller. Authorized agent, Vanessa Miller. Amount, $300,000. Collateral, primary residence. For a moment, the room felt as if it had tilted slightly. They had not only taken $140,000 from the trust, they had leveraged my house. I sat down carefully. This house was paid off. Charles and I finished the mortgage 15 years ago. I remember the day we mailed the final check. We had celebrated with takeout barbecue and sweet tea in the backyard. We owned this home free and clear. Or so I believed. I called the number on the letter. After navigating the menu options, I reached a loan officer. Yes, Mrs. Miller, he confirmed. The line of credit was executed last June. Funds were dispersed to Miller Growth Ventures. On what authority? I asked evenly. Power of attorney documentation on file. Of course. How much has been drawn? I continued. The full amount. And the repayment status? There was a pause while he reviewed the screen. Payments have been interest only. However, due to volatility in the associated investment account, the bank is exercising its right to reassess the line. Translation: if Mark's venture faltered, they would call the loan, which meant foreclosure was no longer theoretical. It was strategic leverage. I thanked him and hung up. Then I did something very simple. I walked into my living room and touched the mantle. Charles had carved our initials into the underside before installing it. G plus C, 1,983. We had raised Vanessa in this house, measured her height against the pantry wall, nursed fevers on the couch, buried our dog in the backyard. And my daughter had used it as collateral without a conversation. The betrayal was no longer financial. It was structural. My phone buzzed. "Vanessa," I answered. "Mom, I was going to call you," she began quickly. "The bank reached out to us too. It's just procedural." "Procedural?" I asked. "Yes. These reviews happen when investment returns fluctuate. Mark's project is long-term. It's solid. You mortgaged my house." Silence. "Technically, the line was structured under your authority," she said carefully. "My authority? You signed the POA extension. We discussed expanding our options." "No," I said calmly. "You discussed expanding yours." Her voice sharpened. "Mom, this is how wealth grows. You've always been comfortable staying small. Mark and I are trying to build something bigger for Emily, too." "For Emily." They always return to that. "You risked my home without informing me," I replied. "We intended to pay it back before you even noticed." Before I noticed. There it was again, the assumption of decline. "I have noticed," I said. She sighed dramatically. "You're making this emotional." "No," I answered quietly. "You did." She lowered her voice, almost soothing. "Mom, you're alone in that house. It's too big for you. If something happened to you, managing it would be complicated. We're thinking long-term. Managing it. As if I were already gone. "I will be managing my own long-term plans," I said. "You're overreacting." "Am I?" "Yes. You're letting pride get in the way." "Pride." I almost smiled. Pride did not pay tuition. Pride did not fund trust accounts. Pride did not drive a 15-year-old car to keep investments intact. Discipline did, she continued. "Look, Emily doesn't need this stress right now. She's starting her career. Let's not blow up the family over paperwork." Paperwork again. When people minimize, they reveal. "I'm meeting with my attorney tomorrow," I said. "Mom, I suggest you and Mark prepare your documentation." I ended the call. For several minutes, I stood in the quiet of my living room. The house did not feel smaller. It felt heavier. Outside, the maple tree Charles planted cast long afternoon shadows across the yard. Foundations, roots, stability. They had gambled with it. At 6 p.m., I drove to the grocery store. Not because I needed groceries, because I needed normalcy. In the produce aisle, I ran into Mrs. Henderson again. "Gloria, honey, how are you holding up?" she asked gently. "I'm learning," I replied. She nodded, the way women who have lived through their own storms nod. "You know," she said, picking up a bag of apples, "sometimes the people who look strongest from the outside are the ones leaning on someone else's quiet strength." I smiled faintly. "Yes," I said, "and sometimes that quiet strength decides it's done leaning." That night, after dinner, I drafted a formal revocation of power of attorney. Linda had sent a template. I printed it, signed it, dated it, scanned it. Tomorrow it would be notarized and filed. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop. Title: Home Equity. Inside it, I saved the loan notice, the bank confirmation notes, and a written summary of today's conversation with Vanessa. Time, date, tone. Documentation is memory that cannot be manipulated. Before bed, I walked through the house once more. Kitchen, hallway, living room, bedroom. I paused at the front door and looked back. They believed I was aging out of relevance. They believed embarrassment would silence me. They believed control had already shifted. What they did not understand was this: when you mortgage a foundation without permission, you wake up the person who built it. By the time Sunday arrived, the narrative had already begun to spread. It did not come in accusations. It came in concern. That morning, I dressed for church the way I always do: cream blouse, navy skirt, low heels. I pressed my hair carefully, applied a touch of lipstick, and pinned Charles's small gold firefighter badge inside my purse like I had every Sunday since his funeral. I have never missed a service unless illness forced me. Routine is dignity. When I walked into First Baptist on Park Road, the familiar scent of polished wood and hymnals wrapped around me. The choir was rehearsing softly. Mrs. Henderson waved from the third pew. But I noticed something else. The glances. Not cruel. Measured. After the service, as we stood in the fellowship hall with paper cups of coffee and store-bought pound cake, I heard it for the first time. "Gloria, Vanessa mentioned you've been under a lot of stress lately," said Karen Whitfield, whose daughter went to high school with Vanessa. "She said you've been a little forgetful." Forgetful. There it was. I smiled gently. "Did she?" Karen nodded sympathetically. "It happens. My mother went through a phase like that before we realized she needed more support." Support. Such a polite word. "I manage my affairs just fine," I replied calmly. Karen patted my arm. "Of course you do." The conversation shifted, but the message lingered. Vanessa was laying groundwork. That afternoon, I returned home and found a voicemail waiting. It was not from Vanessa. It was from a physician's office. "Mrs. Miller, this is Carolina Cognitive Health. Your daughter requested we reach out to schedule a wellness evaluation." I did not let the message finish. I deleted it. Then I sat down at my desk and wrote another entry in my documentation folder. Date, time, nature of contact. This was no longer only about money. This was about credibility. If they could establish diminished capacity, every financial decision I contested could be reframed as confusion. I called Linda immediately. "They've initiated a cognitive evaluation request," I said. Linda's voice sharpened. "Without your consent?" "Yes." "Good," she replied. I blinked. "Good?" "Yes. It shows intent. It shows they're building a capacity narrative." "So what do I do?" "You stay ahead of it," she said. "Voluntarily schedule a full independent cognitive assessment with a physician of your choosing. Establish baseline competency before they try to define it for you." That is the difference between reacting and counter-positioning. By Tuesday morning, I had an appointment scheduled with Dr. Alan Reeves, a neurologist recommended by Linda. When I walked into his office, I did so with my spine straight. Dr. Reeves was calm, methodical, mid-60s. "Why are you here today, Mrs. Miller?" he asked. "My daughter believes I may be experiencing cognitive decline," I answered evenly. "I disagree." He studied me carefully. We went through every test. Memory recall, pattern recognition, short-term retention, problem-solving sequences. At one point, he slid a sheet of numbers across the desk. "Balance this," he said casually. I smiled faintly. "I balanced a $42 million district budget for 15 years, I replied. "I believe I can manage this." 2 hours later, he closed the folder. "Mrs. Miller," he said clearly, "your cognitive function is not only intact, it is above average for your age group." "May I have that in writing?" I asked. He smiled. "You absolutely may." When I left his office with the formal evaluation report in my hand, I felt something unfamiliar, not relief. Therese. Vanessa's strategy had been predictable. Undermine credibility, control assets, frame opposition as instability. What she had not accounted for was my professional history. I had spent decades reviewing fraud indicators in school district expenditures, misallocated funds, unauthorized transfers, inflated contracts. I knew exactly what positioning looked like. That evening, Vanessa called again. "Mom, I heard you scheduled some doctor appointment," she said, her voice tight. "Yes. You didn't need to do that." "I did. You're making this into something ugly." "No," I said calmly. "I'm preventing it from becoming something worse." She was quiet for a moment. "Mark is under pressure," she said finally. "Investors are jittery. This isn't a good time for drama." Drama. They had mortgaged my house, transferred trust funds, initiated cognitive evaluations. And I was the source of drama. "Vanessa," I said softly, "do you remember the year your father's department cut overtime funding?" She hesitated. "What does that have to do with anything?" "You were 16. We tightened our budget for 8 months. I sold jewelry. We did not touch your college fund. Do you remember that?" "Yes." "I protected your future without leveraging our home." Silence. "You're comparing apples and oranges," she muttered. "No," I said. "I'm comparing character." Her breathing changed slightly. "Mom," she said, almost pleading now, "don't go nuclear over this." I let the words sit between us. "I haven't begun," I replied quietly. After we hung up, I printed Dr. Reeves' evaluation and placed it in my documentation folder. Then I drafted a formal letter revoking all financial authority previously granted under the extended POA. Linda would file it with the appropriate institutions in the morning. I walked into my living room and turned on a single lamp. The house felt steady again. Outside, the street was quiet. Porch lights flickered on one by one as evening settled over the neighborhood. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the ache. Not for the money, for the shift. I had not raised Vanessa to become manipulative. I had raised her to survive. Somewhere along the way, survival had turned into ambition without boundary. I picked up the engraved bracelet once more. Foundation. They were trying to loosen it. But they were underestimating something critical. Gaslighting only works when the target doubts herself. And I do not doubt what I see. There comes a moment in every woman's life when the waiting stops. Not because the pain disappears, but because clarity arrives. By Wednesday morning, my house no longer felt like a place of memory. It felt like a position to defend. I woke before sunrise and stood at the kitchen window, watching the light stretch slowly across the maple tree Charles planted 20 years ago. He used to say roots don't grow in applause, they grow in darkness. I had spent decades building roots. Vanessa thought I would respond emotionally, that I would argue, cry, beg for reconciliation. Instead, I made a list. 1. Revoke power of attorney. 2. Freeze all associated accounts. 3. Secure independent legal and medical documentation. 4. Establish asset protection barriers. 5. Do not warn them. By 9 a.m., I was seated in Linda Carver's office again. She reviewed Dr. Reeves' cognitive report and nodded with approval. This shuts down the capacity narrative, she said. If they attempt guardianship proceedings now, it will look retaliatory. Good, I replied. We filed the official POA revocation immediately. Linda sent certified notices to the trust custodian, Carolina First Lending, and 3 other financial institutions where my accounts were held. Next, she continued, we isolate exposure. She explained how we could move the remainder of my liquid assets into a newly formed limited liability company under my control. A quiet wall. Not illegal, not deceptive, strategic. I listened carefully. At 67, I am not reckless, but I am no longer naive. By noon, the paperwork was initiated. A new entity. Miller Holdings, LLC. Owner, Gloria D. Miller. Operating manager, Gloria D. Miller. No shared access. No secondary email. No convenience. Just structure. When I left Linda's office, I did not feel vindictive. I felt balanced. Back home, I brewed coffee and sat at my desk. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock in the hallway. At 2:17 p.m., my phone rang. Mark. He had never called me directly before unless Vanessa was in the room. Mrs. Miller, he began, voice tight. We received notice from the bank. The line of credit is frozen. Yes, I said calmly. You didn't warn us. You didn't warn me. He exhaled sharply. This is bigger than you think. I'm sure it is. We have commitments, he pressed. Investors, contracts. Pulling liquidity now sends a signal. Perhaps you should not have built commitments on borrowed property. Silence. You're going to collapse a deal that could triple our portfolio, he snapped. Our? I asked softly. You know what I mean. No, I said. I do not. His tone shifted. This isn't personal. I almost laughed. You mortgaged my house. Another silence. You signed the extension, he insisted. I signed a document under trust. You exercised it under concealment. You're overreacting. There it was again. Overreacting. The word people use when control slips from their hands. I am reacting proportionately, I said. You should prepare accordingly. He hung up without another word. I closed my eyes for a moment and allowed myself to feel the weight of what was coming. They would not retreat quietly. Ambition does not surrender. At 4 p.m., I received an email from Vanessa. Subject, celebration dinner, final confirmation. Inside was a digital invitation to a private investment appreciation dinner at a high-end steakhouse in Uptown Charlotte the following Friday. Guest list included several venture capital contacts and 2 regional developers. It was framed as a continuation of Emily's graduation celebration. The timing was not accidental. They needed the appearance of stability. I stared at the invitation. They assumed I would stay silent. They assumed embarrassment had diminished me. Instead, I forwarded the email to Linda. Her response came 5 minutes later. Interesting. That was all she wrote. Interesting, in legal language, means opportunity. That evening, I walked through my home slowly. Kitchen, hallway, living room. I touched the mantel again, running my fingers beneath the carved initials. Dub Z, 1983. I remembered the night Charles proposed to me. We had nothing but discipline and faith. No investors, no leveraged assets, just work. He used to say, if you ever have to choose between looking successful and being secure, choose secure. Vanessa had chosen looking successful. I had chosen secure. At 7:30 p.m., I drove to the hardware store and purchased a small, fireproof document safe. Not because I was afraid, because I was prepared. When I returned home, I placed inside it the trust documents, the POA revocation, the cognitive evaluation report, the loan notice, and one handwritten note. Justice isn't loud, it waits. I locked the safe and slid it into the back of my closet. Outside, the neighborhood was calm, porch lights glowing softly, crickets beginning their nightly rhythm. Inside, something else was beginning. Not revenge. Rebalancing. They believed I was isolated. They believed embarrassment would weaken me. They believed narrative could replace documentation. But they had forgotten something critical. I spent 32 years auditing other people's mistakes, and I never miss patterns. The dinner invitation sat quietly in my inbox, and for the first time since that bracelet hit the kitchen tile, I was no longer reacting. I was positioning. The invitation sat in my inbox for 2 full days before I opened it again. Private Investment Appreciation Dinner, Friday, 7 p.m. The Crown Room, Sullivan's Steakhouse, Uptown Charlotte. Dress code, formal. Emily's graduation was now a marketing accessory. I did not respond to the invitation. I did not need to. I spent Thursday morning at the bank instead. Not the branch Vanessa knew. The downtown branch where I had opened my first checking account 38 years ago. The branch manager, Thomas Green, had gray at his temples and the kind of steady presence that comes from decades in institutional finance. Mrs. Miller, he said warmly when I entered his office, what can I help you with today? I need confirmation, I replied evenly, sliding the documentation across his desk. I want to ensure that all revocations and freezes have been properly processed. He reviewed the papers carefully. Yes, he confirmed. The trust account has been locked from third-party access. The home equity line has been frozen pending investigation, and the new LLC structure is active. Good. He leaned back slightly. If I may, he added, this is substantial restructuring. It is, I agreed. Is there risk of escalation? Yes. He nodded once. If there's anything further we need to safeguard, we will. I appreciated that he did not ask unnecessary questions. Institutions recognize discipline. By late afternoon, I returned home and stood in front of my closet. Formal. That was the dress code. I had not planned on attending. Not originally. But then I reconsidered. They were presenting stability. They were leveraging appearances. And if Mark intended to close investment commitments that night, then timing mattered. I chose a charcoal gray dress. Modest. Structured. Clean lines. I pressed it carefully and laid it on the bed. I did not feel anxious. I felt deliberate. At 6:15 p.m., Friday evening, I parked 1 block away from Sullivan's Steakhouse. Charlotte's skyline glowed against the dusk, glass towers reflecting the last light of day. Uptown pulsed with quiet ambition, valets, tailored suits, the hum of capital moving invisibly between conversations. I did not walk in immediately. I stood across the street first. Through the wide windows, I could see Vanessa laughing at something a man in a navy blazer said. Mark stood near the head of the long private dining table, posture confident, hand resting lightly on the back of a leather chair. Emily was there too. She wore a pale blue dress, her graduation smile replaced with something more restrained. She looked older tonight, sharper. The investors were already seated. Wine glasses filled, folders on the table. Presentation tablets ready. Mark was mid-pitch. I crossed the street slowly. Inside, the restaurant smelled of grilled steak and polished wood. A hostess greeted me with a professional smile. "I'm here for the Miller party," I said. Her expression flickered slightly as she scanned the list. "Yes, of course." She led me toward the private room. The doors were partially closed. I could hear Mark's voice. Leveraging initial capital infusion to expand regional acquisition strategy. I waited until he paused for breath. Then I stepped inside. The room did not erupt. It stilled. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Vanessa's face drained of color first. "Mom?" she said sharply. Mark turned. For a brief second, his composure cracked. "Mrs. Miller," he corrected himself quickly, attempting control. "We didn't realize you'd be joining us." "I wasn't invited," I replied calmly. "But since my assets are underwriting the evening, I felt attendance was appropriate." A ripple moved around the table. One of the investors, a man in his late 50s with steel-rimmed glasses, looked from Mark to me. "I'm sorry," he said carefully. "Underwriting?" I stepped forward and placed a slim leather folder on the polished table. "Gloria Miller," I said, extending my hand. "Primary capital source behind Miller Growth Ventures." Silence. Vanessa stood abruptly. "Mom, this is not the time." "You're right," I said evenly. "The time was before you mortgaged my home." Several heads turned toward Mark. He forced a tight smile. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," I replied softly. "It's documentation." I opened the folder. Inside were copies of the frozen line of credit notice, the trust transfer authorization, the POA revocation confirmation. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse dramatically. I simply laid the paper trail out where everyone could see it. The steel rim investor leaned forward. "Mark," he said slowly, "were these funds disclosed as leveraged from personal family collateral?" Mark swallowed. "It's internal structuring," he attempted. "Temporary liquidity." "Without consent," I added. Vanessa hissed under her breath. "You're ruining us." I turned to her. "No, Vanessa," I said quietly. "I built you." The room felt tighter now. The investor looked directly at me. "Mrs. Miller," he asked, "are you stating that the capital infusion was unauthorized?" "Yes." A heavy silence followed. "Businessmen do not respond emotionally. They respond to risk." Mark tried again. "This is a family dispute being dramatized." I shook my head slightly. "This is fiduciary exposure." That word landed. Exposure. The investor straightened. "We'll need to pause this discussion," he said firmly, "until clarity is established." Chairs shifted. Wine glasses were set down. One by one, the investors began collecting their folders. Mark's confidence dissolved in visible degrees. Vanessa stared at me as if she had never seen me before. Emily stood frozen between them. The hostess appeared discreetly at the doorway, sensing the shift. I closed the folder gently. "I won't stay," I said. "I simply wanted transparency." Then I turned and walked out. Outside, the Charlotte night air felt cool against my skin. I did not rush. I did not look back. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A bank alert notification. Carolina First Lending had formally initiated reassessment of the home equity line. Pressure was moving now, quietly, systematically. And inside that steakhouse, something had just collapsed. By the time I reached home that night, the silence had weight to it. Not the fragile silence of loneliness, the structural silence that follows impact. I placed my purse on the kitchen counter and removed my heels carefully. My feet ached slightly, but my hands were steady. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the sink, staring out into the dark yard. At 9:42 p.m., my phone rang. Mark. I let it ring. Then Vanessa. Then Mark again. Finally, a text message appeared. "What did you just do?" I did not respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into my online banking portal. There it was. A formal notification from Carolina First Lending. Due to increased risk exposure and material changes in collateral authority, the bank is exercising its right to suspend and reassess the home equity line of credit associated with property at 4,821 Maple Ridge Drive. My home. Under reassessment. That meant one thing. The bank had detected instability in the investment vehicle tied to the loan. Investors withdrawing. Capital shrinking. Mark's leverage evaporating. I leaned back in my chair. In business, collapse rarely begins with explosion. It begins with hesitation. The next call came from an unfamiliar number. I answered. Mrs. Miller, this is Daniel Harris from Carolina First Lending's Risk Management Department. Yes, I replied calmly. We've received notification of a dispute concerning the underlying authority for the line of credit executed last June. We need clarification regarding consent. You do not have it, I said. There was a pause. Understood, he responded carefully. Given the circumstances, the account is now under formal review. Pending findings, repayment acceleration may be required. Acceleration. If the bank called the loan, the full $300,000 would become immediately due. Mark did not have that liquidity. His entire strategy depended on staged returns from investor funds, which were now in question. I will cooperate fully, I said. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. When I ended the call, I did not feel triumphant. I felt precise. At 10:15 p.m., headlights flashed through my front window. I moved quietly toward the door. Vanessa's white SUV pulled into the driveway. Behind it, Mark's dark sedan. They did not knock gently. Vanessa rang the bell repeatedly. I opened the door. Vanessa stepped inside without invitation. What have you done? She demanded. Mark followed, jaw tight. I've corrected exposure, I replied. You blindsided us in front of investors, Mark snapped. You leveraged my home without consent. You signed the POA, he shouted. And you exceeded fiduciary duty, I said evenly. Vanessa paced across the living room. They're pulling out, she said. Do you understand that? 2 of them walked out tonight. Do you know what that does to market confidence? I understand confidence, I answered. I do not understand deception. This was temporary, she insisted. Temporary misrepresentation is still misrepresentation. Mark stepped closer. If the bank accelerates the line, we could default. That is unfortunate, I replied. You would let your own daughter lose everything? I met his eyes. You let your own mother lose her home. Vanessa stopped pacing. You're exaggerating, she said, but her voice trembled slightly. Am I? I asked. $300,000 against a paid-off house is not exaggeration. It was strategic leverage. Mark barked. No, I said calmly. It was borrowed credibility. The room fell silent. Emily stood in the doorway now. I had not seen her enter. Her eyes moved from me to her parents. Is this true? She asked quietly. Vanessa's composure fractured for the first time. It's complicated, she said quickly. Did you use Grandma's house? Emily pressed. Mark inhaled sharply. It was an investment vehicle. Did you use her house? Emily repeated. Silence. I did not speak. This was not my moment to explain. Vanessa looked at her daughter. We were building something for you, she said. Emily's expression changed. Not confusion. Recognition. For me? She whispered. Or for you? Mark ran a hand through his hair. You don't understand how business works, he said to Emily. No, she replied slowly. But I understand honesty. The weight in the room shifted again. Vanessa turned to me, anger returning like armor. You could have handled this privately. I tried, I said. You could have waited until after the deal closed. And then what? I asked softly. Waited until foreclosure notices arrived. Mark exhaled sharply. If the bank accelerates, we'll need liquidity immediately. That is not my responsibility, I answered. Vanessa's eyes flashed. So this is punishment? No, I said quietly. This is consequence. Outside, a tow truck passed slowly down the street, its yellow lights rotating across the living room walls. The irony did not escape me. Mark looked at me differently now, not dismissively, calculating. If we can secure 30 days, he said, lowering his voice, we can stabilize. You should have thought of stabilization before exposure, I replied. Vanessa stepped forward. Mom, please, she said, and for the first time her voice cracked. Don't let everything we built collapse. I looked around my living room. The mantel, the framed photos, the carved initials beneath the wood. This, I said quietly, gesturing around me, is what I built. Silence fell heavily. Emily moved closer to me. Grandma, she asked softly, are we going to lose this house? No, I answered without hesitation. Vanessa flinched. Mark looked at his watch, calculating time, interest, pressure. "You've set something in motion," he muttered. "Yes," I replied, and in that moment, we all understood something. The callback had begun. The bank would review. The investors would reassess. Liquidity would tighten. And leverage, once their weapon was now gone. Vanessa stared at me as if searching for weakness. She did not find it. They left shortly after midnight. No resolution. No apology. Just the sound of tires rolling down Maple Ridge Drive. I locked the door and leaned against it for a moment. Not exhausted. Centered. When institutions move, they move methodically. And tonight, the first external mechanism had shifted. The bank had called attention. The investors had paused. Confidence had cracked. And somewhere inside that fracture, truth had entered. The next morning, the air felt different. Not calmer. Charged. By 8:30 a.m., my phone had already vibrated 6 times with notifications from financial news alerts tied to regional investment circles. Miller Growth Ventures had been mentioned in 2 short industry updates, nothing dramatic, just phrases like capital structure reassessment and temporary liquidity concerns. Translation: word was spreading. In business, reputation does not collapse overnight. It thins first. At 9:12 a.m., Linda called. "The bank has officially initiated acceleration review," she said. "How long?" I asked. "Could be days, could be a week. Depends on how aggressively risk management moves. And if they accelerate, then the full $300,000 becomes due immediately." Mark did not have that cash. His venture was built on layered investor commitments, not liquid reserves. I thanked Linda and ended the call. For a long moment, I sat in my kitchen watching the sunlight move slowly across the tile floor. I did not celebrate. Collapse, even when justified, carries weight. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was not Vanessa. It was a number I recognized. Mr. Harrison Cole, one of the investors from the steakhouse dinner. "Mrs. Miller," he began carefully when I answered. "I wanted clarification." "I expected you might," I replied. "Was the capital used by Miller Growth Ventures secured through your property without direct consent?" "Yes." A measured pause. "That was not disclosed in our review documentation." "I am aware. And you have revoked authority?" "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "That materially changes our exposure model." I assumed it would. "Thank you for your transparency," he said. "We'll be suspending participation, pending internal audit." Internal audit. Those 2 words were more damaging than any confrontation. When investors audit, they look everywhere. By 2 p.m., Vanessa called again. I answered. "They're pulling out," she said immediately. "I know. You talked to them?" "Yes." "You're poisoning the deal." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm disinfecting it." She let out a sharp breath. "Do you have any idea what this does to Mark's credibility?" "Yes." Silence stretched between us. "This was supposed to be our breakthrough," she whispered. "At my expense," I answered. "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." She began pacing. I could hear it in the rhythm of her breath. "If the bank accelerates, we don't have $300,000 liquid. That is unfortunate." "You're willing to let us default?" "I am unwilling to let myself be collateral." The words landed harder than I intended. There was a long pause. Then, quietly, "What do you want?" It was the first honest question she had asked since this began. "I want accountability," I said. "Full disclosure, written acknowledgement, and immediate separation of my assets from your ventures." "You're asking for humiliation." "I endured humiliation at the graduation," I replied softly. "This is documentation." She did not respond. Instead, she hung up. At 4:45 p.m., something else happened. I was standing at my front window when a dark SUV pulled slowly into their driveway down the street. Not mine. Theirs. 2 men stepped out wearing suits with discreet folders in hand. Even from across the lawn, I recognized the posture. Bank compliance officers. They rang Vanessa's doorbell. No one answered immediately. Then the door opened. Mark stepped outside. There was no shouting, no dramatic gestures, just measured conversation. Paperwork exchanged. Signatures requested. Formal review initiated. I did not step outside. I did not approach. I simply watched. For a moment, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, sadness, because collapse is rarely theatrical. It is procedural. By early evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Emily. "Grandma," she said softly. "Yes, baby. Is this because of me?" "No," I answered immediately. "This is because of decisions." She was quiet. "I didn't know about the house," she said. "I know. Mom said it was structured capital. It was leveraged without consent." Another silence. "I shouldn't have dropped your gift," she whispered. "The bracelet." I swallowed gently. "That wasn't about the bracelet," I said. "Yes, it was." I closed my eyes. "Emily," I said carefully, "success without integrity collapses." She inhaled slowly. "I don't want to be part of something that hurts you." "You're not," I replied. "You are not responsible for their choices." When we ended the call, the house felt lighter. Not because the crisis was over, but because the next generation was thinking. Around 8 p.m., I received the official email. Carolina First Lending had issued a Notice of Acceleration Review, 30 days to resolve outstanding exposure or risk formal demand. 30 days. Pressure window established. I printed the notice and placed it in the fireproof safe. Then I sat quietly in the living room. The mantle, the carved initials, the photographs. They had built a dinner to showcase success. I had walked in and introduced documentation. They had built a narrative of instability. I had introduced medical evaluation. They had leveraged collateral. The bank had introduced consequence. The system was moving now. And this time, I had not raised my voice. I had simply entered the room. By Monday morning, the story had shifted from quiet tension to visible fracture. I did not have to call anyone. The calls came to me. At 8:03 a.m., Mr. Harrison Cole emailed again. "Mrs. Miller, we are initiating a full compliance audit of Miller Growth Ventures. We require confirmation regarding capital origination." Confirmation. They wanted it in writing. I responded with a single sentence. "I did not authorize the use of my home or trust assets as collateral for Miller Growth Ventures." Clear, documented, archived. By 10:15 a.m., Vanessa arrived at my front door without calling first. She did not ring the bell this time. She knocked once. Firm. Controlled. I opened the door. She looked exhausted. Not disheveled, Vanessa does not allow that, but tight around the eyes. The kind of tight that comes from realizing control has slipped beyond recovery. "We need to talk," she said. I assumed we would. She stepped inside and remained standing in the entryway, as if sitting might imply surrender. "Investors are conducting background verification," she said. "They're questioning liquidity structure. Mark's being asked about personal guarantees. That is standard under exposure review," I replied calmly. "You're feeding them language." "No," I said. "I'm answering direct questions." Her jaw flexed. "You didn't have to say unauthorized." It was unauthorized. "You could have said miscommunication. That would have been false." She let out a sharp breath. "You've humiliated us." I met her gaze. "You humiliated me first." "That was different." "Yes," I said quietly. "It was." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she did something unexpected. She sat down. Not on the edge of the chair, fully, as if her legs had finally acknowledged the strain. "They're threatening to withdraw all capital," she said more softly now. "If that happens, the project collapses. Mark's reputation collapses. Everything we've built." She trailed off. I studied her carefully. "Vanessa," I said, "what did you think would happen when you leveraged my house without telling me?" She rubbed her temples. "We thought we'd stabilize before you noticed." "Before you noticed," that phrase again. "Did you believe I wouldn't check?" I asked. "You've never micromanaged us." "That's because I trusted you." The word hung there. Trusted. Vanessa's eyes flickered. "We weren't trying to hurt you," she said. "You were trying to bypass me." Silence. Then her voice lowered further. "If you issue a statement retracting unauthorized, investors might hold." "No," I said. She looked up sharply. "No? I will not rewrite the truth to preserve your image." Her expression hardened again. "So this is punishment?" "No," I repeated. "This is alignment." "With what?" "With consequence." She stood abruptly. "You're enjoying this." I did not respond immediately. Enjoyment had nothing to do with it. What I felt was balance restoring itself. "I'm not enjoying anything," I said finally. "I'm protecting what I built." She stared at me for several long seconds. Then she left without another word. That afternoon, I drove downtown. Not to Linda's office, to Sullivan's Steakhouse. It was empty at 3:30 p.m., quiet except for staff resetting tables. The manager recognized me. "Mrs. Miller," he said cautiously. "Everything okay?" "I'd like a copy of the event billing from Friday," I replied. He hesitated. As host, Mark Miller signed the authorization, he said carefully. "Yes," I replied. "And what collateral method was listed for the event?" He checked his tablet. "Corporate account linked to Miller Growth Ventures." "Thank you," I said. Another thread confirmed. Expenses stacked atop borrowed leverage. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the Charlotte skyline felt less impressive. Glass towers reflect light. They also shatter. At 5:20 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it was not Vanessa. It was Mark. His voice was different. Lower. Controlled. "We need a meeting," he said. "With whom?" "You. Me. The investors." "No," I replied. "You owe us that." "I owe you nothing." He inhaled sharply. "If this goes public." "It already has," I said. "They'll say you sabotaged your own family?" "I did not sabotage anything." "You walked into a private investment dinner." I introduced documentation. Silence. "You don't understand how markets work," he muttered. "I understand risk exposure," I replied. "And I understand fiduciary duty." His voice tightened. "If the bank accelerates, we have 30 days. "Yes. You could refinance privately." I almost smiled. "You're asking me to rescue the leverage again." "I'm asking you to protect Emily." There it was. The emotional anchor. "She is not your bargaining chip," I said quietly. He hung up. By evening, the shift was undeniable. I received an automated notification from a regional investment bulletin. Miller Growth Ventures postpones capital expansion pending structural review. Postpones. Corporate language for retreat. I printed it and added it to the documentation folder. Then I walked into the living room and sat beneath the mantel. App C. 1983. I thought about the night Vanessa was born. The hospital room was small. Charles had held her carefully, terrified and proud all at once. We promised to protect her. We did not promise to fund ambition without limits. Outside, the maple tree moved gently in the breeze. Inside, something had already collapsed. Not my house, not my stability. Their illusion. And illusions rarely survive exposure. Collapse does not arrive with sirens. It arrives with emails. By Tuesday morning, 3 days after the steakhouse dinner, the financial pressure was no longer quiet. It was formal. At 7:18 a.m., Mark forwarded me a message by mistake, or perhaps out of desperation. Subject, capital withdrawal notice. 2 primary investors had officially suspended their participation pending full audit clarification. A third had requested immediate documentation of asset origination for the initial infusion. Without those commitments, Miller Growth Ventures was not expanding. It was shrinking. I did not reply. At 9:02 a.m., another notification arrived, this one from Carolina First Lending. Preliminary review indicates material discrepancy in authorization disclosure. Formal demand may be issued within 14 business days. 14 days. Acceleration window tightening. At 10:30 a.m., I was pruning the rose bushes along my driveway when I heard raised voices down the street. Vanessa's. Mark's. The tone was no longer polished. It was strained. A dark sedan pulled into their driveway shortly afterward. Not investors this time. Legal counsel. They stayed for 2 hours. When they left, Mark did not walk them to their car. He remained inside. Doors closed. Blinds drawn. That afternoon, Emily called. Her voice was different now. Quieter. "I found something," she said. "What did you find?" I asked gently. "I was looking at Mom's office files. There's a folder labeled Bridge Phase. It outlines projected investor roll-in tied to Grandma Asset Guarantee." Grandma Asset Guarantee. The phrase struck like cold water. "They built the model assuming your house secured early liquidity," she continued. "Was it disclosed to investors?" No, it's labeled internal. Internal, meaning concealed. Emily inhaled slowly. I didn't know, Grandma, I swear. I know. There was a long pause. They're saying you're destroying everything. I am not destroying anything, I replied. I am revealing it. Silence. I don't want to live in that house right now, she whispered. My chest tightened, not from panic, from clarity. You are always welcome here, I said. She did not answer immediately, but she did not say no. By late afternoon, the next crack appeared. A local business columnist posted a brief online mention. Sources indicate Miller Growth Ventures facing structural reassessment following collateral review. No names mentioned. But in Charlotte's investment circle, that was enough. Reputation, once questioned, does not return to neutral quickly. At 6:45 p.m., there was a knock at my door. Not frantic, measured. Mark stood outside, alone. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Structurally. We need to resolve this, he said quietly when I opened the door. Resolution requires transparency, I replied. He nodded once. The bank is preparing a formal demand letter. I'm aware. If they accelerate, we don't have $300,000. That is not my debt, I said calmly. He looked past me into the house, the mantel, the hallway, the quiet. I underestimated you, he said finally. Yes, I replied. He did not argue. We thought if we moved quickly, scaled fast, the returns would outrun the leverage, he admitted. It's how venture cycles work. And if they don't? I asked. He did not answer. Instead, he asked something else. Is there any path where you refinance privately and we restructure? There it was. The final attempt. Re-leverage the foundation. No, I said. He closed his eyes briefly. If this collapses, Vanessa won't forgive you. I met his gaze steadily. She may not forgive me for protecting myself, I said, but she will eventually understand why she should have. He stood there for a long moment. Then he left. At 8:10 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Vanessa, I answered. Her voice was not sharp now. It was tired. They're issuing the demand, she said. Yes. Mark's personal guarantee is being reviewed. That is the bank's process. You've made your point. This was never about a point. What was it about then? She asked. Boundaries. Silence. Then softly, you could have let us explain. I gave you that chance before the dinner. You walked in there like a prosecutor. No, I replied. I walked in like a shareholder. That quieted her. They're talking about potential fraud inquiry, she said after a moment. That word settled heavy between us. Fraud. If investors claimed misrepresentation, regulatory scrutiny could follow. Did you disclose my house as collateral in investor materials? I asked. No, she whispered. Then the exposure is not mine. She began to cry. Not loudly, but audibly. I closed my eyes. I did not comfort her immediately, because comfort without accountability becomes enablement. Vanessa, I said gently, why didn't you just ask me? She didn't answer for several seconds. Because you would have said no. Yes, I replied. The truth. Finally. At 9:30 p.m., an official email arrived. Carolina First Lending issued a notice of acceleration. Full repayment of $300,000 due within 14 days pending final compliance outcome. Mark's liquidity model had collapsed. Investor participation suspended. Bank demand initiated. Regulatory review possible. This was no longer pressure. It was structural failure. I printed the notice and placed it in the fireproof safe. Then I walked into the living room and sat beneath the mantel once more. J. B. 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 J. R. B. 1983. Charles used to say, when you build on borrowed pride, gravity collects. Gravity had arrived. I did not feel victorious. I felt resolved. Because collapse is not cruelty when it is the natural consequence of deception. And tonight, the illusion had finally given way. The day after the bank issued the notice of acceleration, my house felt unnaturally quiet, not tense, paused. By 10 a.m., the neighborhood had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Garbage trucks, lawnmowers, distant dogs barking, but inside my walls, everything felt suspended between consequence and reckoning. I was in the kitchen rolling pie dough when the knock came. Soft, Not urgent. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the door. Emily stood there alone. No makeup, no polished smile, just a pale blue sweater and eyes that looked older than they had a week ago. "Hi, Grandma," she said. "Hi, baby." She stepped inside slowly, as if crossing into a space she wasn't sure she still belonged in. "I didn't call first," she added. "You never have to." She nodded, then glanced toward the living room, the mantel, the framed photographs. She had grown up in this house. Christmas mornings, birthday cakes, sleepovers when Vanessa worked late. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay. Is it true you paid for everything?" I did not answer immediately. Not because I hesitated. Because I wanted her to understand the weight of the question. "Yes," I said finally. "I paid your tuition, your housing, your books, every semester." She swallowed. "Mom said you offered, that it was your idea." "It was," I said. "But that doesn't erase what followed." Her eyes searched mine. "Did they use your house?" "Yes." "For Dad's company?" "Yes." Silence filled the kitchen. I returned to the counter and slid the pie crust into a glass dish. "Chicken pot pie?" she asked quietly. "You always liked it." She gave a faint, almost embarrassed smile. "I didn't know," she said again. "I swear I didn't. I believe you." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Grandma," she whispered, "why didn't you come to the ceremony?" I looked at her gently. "I wasn't invited." Her breath caught. "Mom said you didn't feel well." That was not accurate. She blinked rapidly. "I should have asked," she said. "When I saw you weren't there, I assumed." "You assumed the story you were given," I finished softly. She nodded. For a moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the clink of a spoon against ceramic as I stirred the filling. Then she said something that pierced deeper than any accusation. "When I pushed your gift, I wasn't thinking." I turned to face her fully. "You were thinking," I said. "You were aligning." Her eyes filled. "I didn't want to cause tension," she said. "Mom said you sometimes make things uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. Truth often does. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the velvet box. I had placed the bracelet back inside after that afternoon. I set it gently on the counter between us. "Open it," I said. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. The gold bracelet lay inside, simple and thin. Foundation. She read the engraving and inhaled sharply. "I thought it meant support," she whispered. "It does," I said. "But it also means structure, integrity, what everything else rests on." Her composure broke then, not loudly, but deeply. "I didn't know they were building on you like that," she said. "I know. They keep saying you're tearing us apart." I held her gaze. "Truth does not tear families apart," I said gently. "Deception does." She covered her mouth with her hand. "Is Dad going to jail?" she asked suddenly. I paused. "I don't know," I said honestly. "That depends on what regulators find." She closed her eyes briefly. "I don't want my future built on something that hurts you." "It isn't," I replied firmly. "Your education was clean. Your degree is yours. But the house is mine," I said calmly, "and it will remain mine." She nodded slowly. Then she surprised me. "Can I stay here for a few days?" The question hung in the air. Not rebellion. Not drama. Refuge. "Yes," I said without hesitation. She exhaled in relief. "I just need space," she whispered. "You have it." While the pie baked, we sat at the kitchen table. Not confronting. Not strategizing. Just sitting. After a while, she spoke again. "They called you embarrassing," she said quietly. "Yes." She looked down at her hands. "They were afraid you'd say something about paying for school." "I would have," I admitted. She nodded slowly. "They said investors don't like family dependency narratives." I almost smiled. "Investors don't like undisclosed collateral either." That drew a small, sad laugh from her. For the first time since the graduation, we were not on opposite sides of something. We were simply two women at different stages of learning. By late afternoon, her suitcase sat at the foot of the guest bed. She walked through the house as if reacquainting herself with it. The framed photos. The hallway marks where I'd measured her height at age 10. When she stopped at the mantel, she traced the carved initials beneath it. "Grandpa did that?" she asked. "Yes." "He built this?" "Yes." She nodded. "Mom always said she built everything." She built her path, I said carefully, but not this foundation. That evening, Vanessa called. I answered. Is Emily with you? She asked immediately. Yes. She just left. She needed space. She's overreacting. No, I said quietly. She's processing. You've turned her against us. I've told her the truth. Vanessa's voice trembled. You've destroyed this family. No, I replied softly. You risked it. She hung up. I returned to the kitchen, where Emily was slicing pie. The smell of chicken and rosemary filled the air. Simple, solid, unleveraged. As we sat down to eat, I realized something had shifted permanently, not just in the bank accounts, not just in the investment model, in loyalty. Because the next generation had stepped out of illusion, and collapse, for the first time, had reached the right audience. Sunday arrived quietly. Emily was still asleep in the guest room when I dressed for church. I stood for a moment outside her door, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing. It had been years since she'd slept under this roof. The house felt fuller, not louder, anchored. At First Baptist, the sanctuary hummed with its usual familiarity, organ music warming the air, sunlight filtering through stained glass, the scent of polished pews and perfume worn by women who had been faithful longer than trends last. But this Sunday, the glances were different. News travels fast in small circles, especially when money is involved. After the closing hymn, I stepped into the fellowship hall. Coffee urns steamed along the folding tables. Pound cake slices sat neatly arranged on paper plates. Mrs. Henderson approached first. I heard there was some business tension, she said gently. That's one way to describe it, I replied. She tilted her head. You all right? Yes, I said. I am. She studied me carefully. Women our age know the difference between pride and steadiness. Then Mr. Caldwell, a retired banker, joined us. Gloria, he said in a low voice, if what I'm hearing is accurate, you did the right thing. I did what was necessary. He nodded slowly. Capital built on undisclosed collateral rarely survives audit. It was the first time someone had said it plainly. Not gossip. Not sympathy. Assessment. I didn't intend for it to become public, I said. It always does, he replied. Money leaves footprints. That phrase stayed with me. Money leaves footprints. After church, 3 women from Bible study gathered around me. Karen Whitfield, who days earlier had implied cognitive decline, cleared her throat. I may have spoken too quickly last week, she said quietly. It's all right, I answered. No, she insisted softly. It isn't. There it was again. The shift. Narratives unravel when facts surface. As I drove home, I felt something settle into place. Community is not loud when it supports you. It simply adjusts. When I walked through my front door, Emily was at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. They're talking about Dad online, she said without looking up. Where? Local investor forums. Nothing huge, just questioning liquidity. I nodded. They're saying Grandma asset guarantee wasn't disclosed. The phrase still sounded surreal. Emily met my eyes. I didn't know that's what they called it. It doesn't matter what they called it, I replied. It matters what it was. She hesitated. Mom texted me, she said. She says you've turned the church against them. I almost smiled. I did not need to turn anyone, I said. Truth travels. Emily set her phone down. Why didn't you ever make it clear you paid for school? She asked. I didn't need applause. But maybe you needed acknowledgement. That landed. Perhaps she was right. There is a difference between humility and erasure. That afternoon, I invited 2 women from church over for coffee. Not to gossip, to anchor. We sat at the kitchen table with pound cake leftovers and talked about ordinary things, arthritis remedies, grandchildren, the rising cost of eggs. Then Mrs. Henderson said quietly, Gloria, I've seen this before. Seen what? I asked. Ambition outrunning integrity. She stirred her tea slowly. It starts with small rationalizations. We'll pay it back. She won't mind. It's for the family. Emily listened silently from the hallway. And then? I asked. And then gravity arrives. I did not respond, because gravity had already arrived. Later that evening, Mark's Mercedes disappeared from their driveway. A tow truck. Bright orange lights reflecting across the quiet street. Not dramatic. Not loud. Procedural. Emily stood beside me at the living room window. "They're taking it," she whispered. "Yes," she swallowed. "They always said it symbolized success." I watched as the vehicle was lifted carefully onto the flatbed. "Symbols built on leverage are temporary," I said. And Hay did not answer. Across the street, Vanessa stood in the driveway, arms wrapped around herself. For a moment, I considered walking over. Not to gloat, to steady, but I stayed where I was. Because this was not my lesson to interrupt. By nightfall, a for sale sign appeared in their front yard. Preliminary listing, testing the market, liquidity attempt. Emily stared at it from the porch steps. They're really selling? If the bank accelerates and investors withdraw, they may not have a choice. She sat down slowly. This feels like everything is falling apart. It is, I said gently. Are you okay with that? I considered the question carefully. I am not okay with collapse, I said. I am okay with consequence. She nodded slowly. That night, after dinner, I walked through my house once more. The maple tree outside swayed in the breeze. The mantel held steady. The fireproof safe remained untouched in the closet. Community had adjusted. Investors had retreated. The car was gone. The sign was up. And something else had shifted too. The narrative that began with "Mom is embarrassing" had evolved into capital misrepresentation under review. Truth had replaced insult. And in quiet neighborhoods like ours, reputation rebuilds slowly, but it collapses quickly. By midweek, the for sale sign across the street had a rider attached beneath it. Price reduced. It had been 5 days. 5 days since the steakhouse dinner. 4 since the notice of acceleration. 2 since the Mercedes left on a flatbed. Collapse does not negotiate pride. It compresses it. That afternoon, as Emily sorted through a stack of old photo albums in the living room, there was another knock at the door. Not hurried, measured. Vanessa. Alone. I opened the door. She did not step inside immediately this time. "Can we talk?" she asked. "You can come in," I said. She walked into the living room slowly, her eyes moving across the familiar space as if seeing it differently now. The mantel. The carved initials. The photographs. Emily remained seated on the floor, holding an old graduation photo of Vanessa from high school. Neither spoke at first. Vanessa finally broke the silence. "The bank issued the formal demand letter this morning," she said. "I'm aware. They've frozen Mark's operating accounts pending review. That is standard procedure." Her shoulders sagged slightly. "They're reviewing the original investment prospectus." I said nothing. She looked at Emily. "You've been staying here." "Yes," Emily answered quietly. Vanessa swallowed. "Emily, we're trying to fix this." "By doing what?" Emily asked gently. Vanessa turned back to me. "They're saying if you provide written confirmation that the collateral dispute is resolved, the investors might reconsider." "There is no dispute," I said calmly. "There is documentation. You could sign an acknowledgement that you were aware of the risk structure." I was not. "You could say you misunderstood." I did not. Frustration flashed in her eyes. "You're being inflexible." "No," I replied softly. "I'm being accurate." She took a breath, steadying herself. "Mom, if this goes further, regulators could get involved. That is not my decision. It becomes your problem too if there's investigation." I held her gaze. "I have nothing to conceal." Silence settled heavily between us. Then she said something different. Not defensive. Not strategic. Afraid. Mark could lose his license. There it was. Not the car. Not the house. Not the image. The credential. "That depends on the findings," I said evenly. She sat down across from me. For the first time since this began, she did not posture. She looked tired. "You always taught me to think bigger," she said quietly. "I taught you to think responsibly. I didn't want to live small. You didn't have to." She hesitated. "I didn't want to end up like you." The words landed sharper than anything before. Emily looked up quickly. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly, as if she had not meant to say it out loud. "Like me?" I asked softly. "Alone," she said, careful, counting pennies. I inhaled slowly. "I am not alone," I said, "and I was counting investments, not pennies." She blinked. "I thought you were afraid of risk," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm afraid of deception." The room grew still. Emily set the photo album aside. "Mom," she said gently, You built on Grandma without telling her. Vanessa's composure faltered. We were going to pay it back. With what? Emily asked. Future projections? Vanessa's jaw tightened. This is how expansion works. No, Emily said quietly. This is how leverage works. Silence. Vanessa turned back to me. What do you want? She asked again. The same question as before, but this time, stripped of edge. I want a written acknowledgement of misrepresentation, I said. Full financial disclosure, immediate separation of my assets, and a public correction to investors. That would ruin us, she whispered. No, I said. It would define the damage. She covered her face briefly with her hands. You're asking us to confess. Yes. The word did not waver. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the maple leaves against the window. Vanessa lowered her hands. Blood builds family, she said slowly. Doesn't it? I held her gaze. Character keeps it. The words hung in the air. Emily looked between us. Vanessa stood slowly. If we issue disclosure, she said, there's no coming back to the version of us that existed before. That version, I replied quietly, was built on illusion. She walked toward the door. Before opening it, she paused. I thought success would make you proud, she said without turning around. It would have, I answered, if it had been clean. She left without another word. The house returned to silence. Emily exhaled slowly. Do you think she'll do it? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. But if she doesn't, Emily pressed. Then gravity continues. That evening, I received another email from Carolina First Lending. Formal notice of repayment demand issued to Miller Growth Ventures and personal guarantor Mark Miller. 14 days reduced to 10 due to non-compliance indicators. Pressure compressing. I printed the notice and added it to the safe. Then I stepped outside onto the porch. Across the street, the for sale sign leaned slightly in the wind. The windows of their house were dark. No laughter. No investor SUVs. Just stillness. Emily joined me on the porch. Grandma, she said softly, I don't want my future attached to something like that. It isn't, I assured her. She looked at the house across the street. Mom always said she built everything from nothing. I nodded. She forgot who built before her. We stood there quietly as night settled over Maple Ridge Drive. The attempt had been made, not to apologize, to negotiate. But negotiation without acknowledgement is just repositioning. And I was no longer repositioning. I was standing. The official demand letter arrived by courier. Not email. Not notification. Paper. Thick envelope, bank seal embossed in the corner. Signature required. I signed for it at 9:14 a.m. Standing on my front porch, while the courier balanced his tablet against one knee, across the street, Vanessa's curtains shifted slightly. They knew what it was. Inside, I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter and opened it carefully with a letter opener Charles once used to open fire department commendations. Carolina First Lending had accelerated the home equity line of credit in full, $300,000 due within 10 business days. Failure to remit would result in foreclosure proceedings against the property listed as collateral my home. I read the line twice, not because I didn't understand it, because I did. Acceleration is the bank's final patience. The next step is force. At 10:02 a.m., Linda called. I received a copy, she said. We expected this. Yes. Mark's counsel contacted the bank yesterday requesting extension. It was denied. On what grounds? Material non-disclosure. I exhaled slowly. The word had moved from conversation into documentation. Are they pursuing regulatory reporting? I asked. Preliminary inquiry has been triggered, she replied. If investors file formal complaint, it escalates. And Mark? His professional license may be reviewed. I closed my eyes briefly. This was no longer just financial consequence. It was reputational. Licensing boards do not tolerate misrepresentation. By noon, a second vehicle appeared at Vanessa's house. Not investors, not attorneys. A real estate photographer. Tripod. Flash equipment. Interior staging consultation. They were not testing the market anymore. They were liquidating. Emily stood beside me at the living room window. They're really doing it, she whispered. Yes. Do you think they can sell in time? Not at that price. The housing market in our neighborhood was strong, but urgency lowers leverage. Mark's model had relied on expansion capital. Now he needed survival cash. Ad unu. Potrzebujesz pay. M. My phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. Mrs. Miller, a formal voice said. This is Robert Klein with the State Financial Regulatory Board. So it had begun. Yes, I replied evenly. We are conducting preliminary inquiry regarding asset disclosure practices tied to Miller Growth Ventures. We understand you may have information relevant to collateral authorization. I do. Would you be willing to provide documentation? Yes, thank you. We'll coordinate through your counsel. When I hung up, I did not feel triumph. I felt gravity settling into place. Emily sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Is Dad going to lose everything? She asked quietly. I don't know, I said honestly. That depends on what he chooses to admit. She nodded. I don't want to hate them, she whispered. You don't have to, I replied, but you do have to see clearly. Later that afternoon, Vanessa appeared at my door again. Her eyes were swollen, not from anger, from fear. They've contacted the board, she said immediately. Yes. You talked to them. They called me. You could have refused. I will not obstruct an inquiry. She stepped inside without waiting. Mark's license is under review, she said. If that goes, he can't operate. No firm, no recovery. I met her gaze steadily. You should have considered that before leveraging undisclosed collateral. Her composure cracked. We were trying to build something bigger than this neighborhood, she said, gesturing vaguely around. This neighborhood paid for your education, I replied softly. She flinched. We'll lose the house, she whispered. Which house? I asked. Ours. Or hers. She swallowed. Ours. Yes, I said. That is a possibility. She looked around my living room, the mantel, the framed photos, the steady structure. You're going to watch us fall, she said. No, I replied quietly. I'm watching consequence. She covered her mouth briefly. I didn't think it would unravel this fast. Leverage collapses quickly when trust disappears. Silence settled heavily between us. Then she asked the question she had been circling for days. If we issue full disclosure, if Mark admits misrepresentation, would you testify against him? The weight of that question filled the room. I will testify to the truth, I said. Her eyes closed briefly. That could end everything. It already has, I replied. Outside, a coming soon sign was replaced with active listing. Price lowered again. Emily stood in the hallway listening. Vanessa followed my gaze toward the window. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, I thought success would protect us. Success without integrity is exposure, I answered. She nodded slowly. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. Start with honesty, I said. She left without another word. By evening, another email arrived from Carolina First Lending. Foreclosure proceedings will initiate automatically upon expiration of repayment window if full balance not remitted. 10 days. Clock visible. Across the street, lights flickered on in rooms that once hosted investor dinners and catered gatherings. Now there were cardboard boxes stacked near the windows. Emily stood beside me on the porch again. Are we safe? She asked. Yes, I said firmly. Even if they can't pay? Yes. Because I had already secured the foundation, revoked authority, isolated assets, documented everything. They had built on borrowed credibility. I had built on ownership. Inside, the fireproof safe remained locked. The mantle steady. The carved initials unchanged. Legal consequence had moved from rumor to action. Investors had withdrawn. The bank had accelerated. The regulator had called. The house across the street was for sale. Collapse was no longer theoretical. It was procedural. And procedure does not respond to pleading. It responds to paper. The house across the street sold faster than I expected. Not at their original price. Not even close. But fast enough to signal urgency. By the end of the week, a small red sticker appeared beneath the listing. Under contract. Liquidity move. Damage control. Emily stood beside me at the front window when the sign changed. They're really leaving, she said quietly. Yes. Her voice didn't carry relief. It carried finality. Inside my house, everything felt steady. The floors still creaked in the same places. The kitchen clock still ticked slightly ahead of the microwave. The maple tree still leaned toward the afternoon sun. Foundations do not panic. At 9 a.m., Linda called. They've negotiated a partial repayment plan with the bank, she said. Sale proceeds from their house will go directly toward the accelerated balance. Mark's investors have formally withdrawn. Regulatory review is ongoing, but cooperation has reduced escalation. So, no foreclosure here, I said. No, she confirmed. Your property is secure. I closed my eyes briefly. Not in relief. In closure. Across the street, movers began carrying boxes to a rental truck. Vanessa stepped out onto the driveway holding a small potted plant. For a moment, she looked less like the polished woman from the steakhouse dinner and more like the young mother who once stood in my kitchen asking how to boil pasta properly. Ambition had peeled back. Reality had settled in. Emily watched silently. I should go help, she said softly. That's your decision, I replied. She hesitated. I don't want to choose sides. You're not choosing sides, I said gently. You're choosing integrity. She nodded slowly. Then she did something I did not expect. She walked toward the front door, not across the street. She opened it and turned back to me. Can I stay here while I figure things out? She asked. The question was different now. Not temporary refuge. Transition. Yes, I said, without hesitation. Her shoulders dropped, tension releasing. I don't want to build my life on leverage, she added. Then don't. We spent the afternoon rearranging the guest room. Not dramatically, just practically. We moved her suitcase into the closet, cleared a shelf in the bathroom, shifted the desk in the corner so it faced the window instead of the wall. Small adjustments. Permanent ones. Around 4 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Vanessa. She stood on my porch, eyes red but posture controlled. The house closes in 10 days, she said quietly when I opened the door. I heard. She glanced past me and saw Emily's shoes by the hallway bench. She's staying? She asked. For now. Vanessa nodded once. We're moving into a townhouse rental near South Park, she said. Smaller. I did not comment. She swallowed. Mark has agreed to cooperate fully with the review board. That's wise. They're saying he may receive probation instead of suspension if he discloses everything. Transparency mitigates penalty, I said. She looked at me differently then. Not as an obstacle. As someone who had navigated systems longer than she had, I miscalculated, she said quietly. Yes. Not cruel. Not triumphant. Just true. She exhaled slowly. I thought if we scaled fast enough, we'd outgrow limitations. You cannot outgrow structure, I said gently. You can only respect it. Silence. Then, softer. Are you ever going to forgive me? I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness and trust are not the same, I said. Her eyes flickered. I know. She looked toward the maple tree, swaying slightly in the breeze. I wanted to build something bigger than this street, she admitted. There is nothing wrong with growth, I replied, only with how you fund it. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry, she said finally. The words were not dramatic, not rehearsed. Just tired. I believe you are, I said. Across the street, the movers closed the truck doors. Mark stood beside the driveway, holding a clipboard, signing final paperwork with the real estate agent. No investors. No champagne. No speeches. Just signatures. Emily stepped forward then. Mom, she said softly. Vanessa turned. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. I didn't know, Emily said. I know, Vanessa replied. I don't want to live like that. Vanessa's jaw tightened slightly. I don't either anymore. That was the closest thing to truth I had heard from her since this began. They embraced briefly. Not theatrical. Fragile. Then Vanessa stepped back. We'll call, she said. You can, I replied. When she left, the moving truck rolled slowly down Maple Ridge Drive. The house across the street stood empty for the first time in years. Quiet. Neutral. Emily exhaled beside me. Everything changed so fast, she said. No, I corrected gently. It changed exactly when it had to. That evening, we sat on the porch together. The air was cool. The street calm again. The for sale sign removed. A new family would eventually move in, unaware of the financial war that had unfolded beneath those walls. Emily rested her head lightly against my shoulder. Grandma, she said, I want to build something real. You will, I said. Powah's day. Slowly, I answered, and cleanly. Inside, The mantel remained steady, the carved initials unchanged, the fireproof safe untouched. My house was secure, my name intact, my granddaughter under my roof, not out of rebellion, but clarity. The choice had been made, not to destroy, to rebuild. And this time, on a foundation no one could leverage. 3 months is not a long time, but it is long enough for silence to settle where chaos once lived. The house across the street sold to a young couple from Raleigh. No investors, no catered dinners, just a U-Haul, folding lawn chairs, and a golden retriever that barks at squirrels every morning around 7:15. Normal, ordinary, unleveraged. Inside my house, life has found a new rhythm. Emily wakes early now, earlier than she used to. She sits at the kitchen table with her laptop open, coffee steaming beside her, reviewing internship reports for a civil engineering firm downtown. She chose infrastructure, bridges, roads, structural systems. When she told me, she said it casually, "I want to design things that hold," she'd said. I understood what she meant. This morning, she spreads blueprints across the table while I slice strawberries for breakfast. "They approved my site assessment proposal," she says, a small smile forming. "That's good," I reply. "Did you double-check the load calculations?" She rolls her eyes gently. "Yes, Grandma." I smile back. Routine has replaced crisis. Not because everything is healed, because everything is honest. Vanessa and Mark moved into a 2-bedroom townhouse near South Park. Smaller, quieter, no dining room large enough for investor showcases. Mark accepted a probationary agreement with the regulatory board. No license suspension, but strict oversight. Mandatory compliance training, public record notation. Reputation adjusted, not destroyed, just reduced to scale. Vanessa calls once a week now, not to negotiate, to talk, sometimes about work, sometimes about Emily, sometimes about nothing in particular. She does not mention expansion plans anymore. She mentions budgeting. Last week, she said something that surprised me. I forgot how peaceful smaller can feel. Peace does not impress. It sustains. Emily visits them occasionally. No dramatic confrontations. No blame sessions. Just cautious rebuilding. Trust is not restored with apologies. It is restored with consistency. In my own life, the edges have softened. I return to my church bookkeeping volunteer work. Mrs. Henderson insists I sit in the front pew again. Mr. Caldwell still nods knowingly whenever we cross paths. Community adjusts, not loudly, but firmly. One afternoon last week, I opened the fireproof safe for the first time in months. The documents remained inside, neatly stacked. Trust revocation, cognitive evaluation, bank notices, acceleration letter. I ran my fingers lightly across the top sheet, not to relive it, to remember. Justice is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is procedural. Sometimes it is simply refusing to rewrite the truth. Emily walks into the living room now carrying a small framed photograph. "Grandma," she says, "I found this in the guest room." It's a picture of Vanessa at her high school graduation. She is smiling the same bright smile Emily once wore. "Mom looks happy," Emily says. "She was," I reply. "Before ambition got complicated? Before integrity was tested." Emily sits beside me on the couch. "I don't want to repeat it," she says quietly. "You won't," I answer. "How do you know?" "Because you asked the question." Outside, the maple tree shifts gently in the wind. The mantle remains steady. Right. Act Plus. 1983. Charles would have handled this differently, perhaps more directly. But he would have understood why I did what I did. He always said, "When the storm passes, you don't measure who shouted loudest. You measure what's still standing." What is still standing? My home, my name, my granddaughter's future. 3 months ago, I was told I was embarrassing, too old, too unsophisticated for the image they were presenting. Now, when Emily prepares for work in the morning, she fastens the gold bracelet around her wrist. Foundation. She wears it without ceremony, without announcement, just quietly, the way strength should be worn. Across the street, the new neighbors host barbecues on weekends. No catered investors. No projection screens. Just folding chairs and laughter. Sometimes Emily and I sit on the porch in the evenings. She rests her head lightly against my shoulder. "You didn't destroy them," she said once. "No," I replied. They corrected themselves. "Because of you. Because of exposure. There is a difference. And in that difference lies peace. The house is quieter now, but not lonely. It holds. And sometimes that is enough. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes after everything loud has finished breaking. It isn't emptiness. It's alignment. 6 months have passed now. The townhouse near South Park is occupied. Vanessa sends occasional photos of her smaller kitchen. Mark has taken a salaried compliance role at a mid-sized firm. No equity, no leveraged expansion plans, just steady income and supervision. Ambition scaled. Reputation recalibrated. Across Maple Ridge Drive, the young couple from Raleigh have painted their shutters navy blue. On Saturday mornings, they drink coffee on their porch while their golden retriever chases nothing in particular. Life has resumed its ordinary shape. Inside my house, Emily's drafting table sits by the window in the guest room we no longer call guest. It's her room now. Her internship turned into a full-time offer last week. When she received the email, she didn't scream. She exhaled. Then she walked into the kitchen, handed me her phone, and said, "It's real." I read the offer letter slowly. Civil Infrastructure Associate. Salary, modest, but clean. No leveraged guarantees. No hidden collateral. "You earned this," I said. She smiled. "Because of you." "No," I corrected gently, "because of your work." But we both knew what she meant. That evening, she stood in front of the hallway mirror, fastening the gold bracelet around her wrist. Foundation. She wears it every day now. Not for sentiment, for reminder. Last Sunday, something unexpected happened. Vanessa asked if she could join us for dinner. Not a negotiation. Not a strategy. Dinner. I cooked pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans. The same meal I made the night Charles and I mailed our final mortgage check. Vanessa arrived without makeup heavy enough to perform confidence. Mark followed quietly, carrying a bottle of wine modest label, not the kind selected to impress investors. We sat around the oak dining table, the same table where tuition spreadsheets once lay, the same table where documentation replaced illusion. At first, conversation stayed neutral. Weather, work, traffic on Isaac Tandasset. Then, halfway through dinner, Vanessa put her fork down. "I was ashamed of you," she said quietly. The words did not explode. They settled. Emily looked up slowly. "I thought you represented limitations," Vanessa continued. "I didn't understand you were representing stability." I listened, not interrupting, not softening it. "I confused polish with worth," she admitted. Silence followed. Then she said something I did not expect. "You built the only thing that survived." I looked around the table. Emily steady in her chair. Mark quiet, humbled. The mantle visible from the dining room. G. AFT. D. D. G. 1983. "I built what I knew how to build," I said. "And we tried to build faster," Mark added quietly. "Yes," I replied. "You did." No accusation. Just acknowledgement. Vanessa reached across the table, then not dramatically, just enough for her fingers to rest lightly over mine. "I'm sorry," she said again. This time, I felt the difference. Not desperation. Not positioning. Ownership. "I forgive you," I said. Forgiveness does not erase consequence. It releases control. After dinner, we stood together on the front porch. The maple tree swayed gently in the warm evening air. The new neighbors laughed across the street. Ordinary life. Unleveraged. Emily stepped forward and looked at the carved initials beneath the mantel through the window. "Grandpa would have handled this differently," she said softly. "Yes," I replied, "but he would have approved of the ending." Vanessa glanced at me. "Do you regret walking into that dinner?" she asked. I thought about the steakhouse, the polished table, the folders, the moment silence replaced performance. "No," I said. "Why?" "Because silence would have cost more." She nodded slowly. "The truth is this. They were never destroyed. They were corrected, and I was never embarrassing. I was inconvenient to illusion. There's a difference." Later that night, after everyone left, I walked through the house slowly, kitchen, hallway, living room. I touched the mantle once more. RC. Itenjo by Bashasen. I thought about that first sentence Vanessa said to me months ago. Mom, stop embarrassing us. You are not coming to that graduation. Do you understand me? I understand now. She wasn't protecting an image. She was protecting a fragile story. But stories built on borrowed foundations eventually crack. Real foundations don't need applause. They hold. And people can shut you out of a ceremony. They can try to minimize you. They can mistake restraint for weakness. But they cannot erase the structure you built beneath their feet. Tonight, my house is quiet again. Not heavy. Not tense. Aligned. Emily's future is hers. Vanessa's ambition has edges now. Mark works within guardrails. And I remain exactly what I have always been. Not flashy. Not polished for investors. But steady. And steady outlasts spectacle every time. The maple leaves rustle softly outside. The mantle does not move. The foundation holds. And that is enough. The lesson of this story is simple but powerful. Integrity is the only foundation that truly holds. Ambition is not wrong. Growth is not wrong. Wanting more for yourself and your family is natural. But when success is built on secrecy, borrowed credibility, or manipulation, it becomes fragile. It may look impressive for a season, but it cannot survive exposure. True strength is quiet. It is found in discipline, transparency, and accountability. It is choosing honesty over image, stability over speed, and character over applause. When relationships are tested by money, status, or pride, what remains standing is not the illusion of success, but the integrity beneath it. In the end, you can be excluded from a celebration, underestimated, or dismissed, but if you have built your life on truth, no one can take that foundation from you.